Welcome to PowerPoint Me in the Right Direction. Tips for effectively using presentational aids mini lesson. Today we will be discussing how to create and use presentational aids for your multimodal communication assignments. Hopefully, at the end of this mini lesson, you will be able to 1. Identify the benefits of using presentational aids in a speech. 2. Identify the possible barriers of using presentational aids incorrectly in a speech. 3. Describe different types of presentational aids. 4. Prepare effective presentational aids. And 5. Plan how and when to use effective presentational aids in a speech. Before we start, first let us define what are presentational aids. Presentational aids help explain the ideas in a speech. They are usually visual, audio, or audio-visual. Visual aids include actual objects, models, photographs, drawings and diagrams, graphs and charts. Audio aids focus on sounds such as musical recordings, conversations, interviews, speeches, and at times, environmental sounds. Audiovisual aids include videotapes and computer-generated slideshow presentations that combine both sight and sound. We will discuss these three types of presentational aids in depth later on in the mini lesson. Now, you may be asking yourself, why should I use presentational aids? What are the benefits of using presentational aids in my speech? Well, think about this. Think about a time when someone gave you directions that were confusing. And perhaps you thought to yourself, if only they had shown you a map, the directions would have been clear. Imagine trying to explain to a toddler how to tie their shoelaces without really demonstrating the process. Or trying to describe to your friend your new favorite song without playing a bit of that song. Now think about it this way. Wouldn't you have been less confused by the directions if that person showed you a map? Or wouldn't the toddler better understand how to tie his or her shoelaces if you physically showed them how? And wouldn't your friend understand the new song you were talking about if they only heard it? This is how presentational aids can help make ideas, especially abstract ideas, clearer for the listener. Now, let's go back to the original question. Why should we use presentational aids? Number 1, presentational aids clarify the verbal message. The best aids make the verbal message clear to the listeners so that they can better comprehend the speaker's meaning. For example, when you are trying to illustrate to the toddler how to tie his or her shoelaces, seeing the process while it is described out loud makes the explanation more concrete. Some things to keep in mind though. If an aid does not add to concreteness, don't use it. Aids should supplement spoken words to make the meaning clearer. Number 2, presentational aids add variety. At times, listeners whose minds start to wander can be drawn back into the speech through the visual aid, all the while giving the audience something new to look at or to listen to. This can be done especially when using a variety of visual aids like image, diagrams, and graphs. Number 3, presentational aids reduce public speaking anxiety. Having a presentational aid while giving a speech can help reduce your public speaking anxiety because the aid can potentially reduce your fear of failure by giving you a sense of safety that in case you forget what you want to say, there is the information in the aid that will help you jog your memory. Number 4, presentational aids help increase listener retention. When giving a speech, one of your main goals is to keep your audience's attention and help them retain the information. Aids can help listeners remember key ideas and points after the presentation is over. Heinisch, Melinda, and Russell, 1993, suggest that people remember as little as 20% of what they only hear, but more than 50% of what they both see and hear. Number 5, presentational aids help convey information concisely. Sometimes when giving a presentation on some ideas or concepts that are difficult to explain in words alone or abstract, some form of visual aid will help clarify the concept to your audience members. For example, when explaining the chemical process of how food is turned into energy in our bodies, a diagram of the process will be more helpful in trying to explain the process than just words alone. And lastly, number 6, presentational aids help appeal to different learning styles. Individuals have different learning preferences. Some listeners might understand a message well by just listening to it, while others might need visual or other forms of reinforcement. Thus, having a presentational aid can increase the number of listeners you are able to reach because they address diverse learning styles and benefit all listeners regardless of learning preferences because the audience will retain your message. Now that we know the benefits of using presentational aids in a speech, let us identify some possible barriers of using presentational aids incorrectly in a speech. One possible barrier is talking to your presentational aid rather than the audience. When giving a speech, make sure you face the audience rather than facing the aid while using it to explain. The aid doesn't care about what you have to say, but the listeners do. It's important not to lose the connection with your audience. When referring to your aid, stand to one side of the aid and gesture with your hand closest to the aid so that you do not have your back turned to the audience. Another barrier to using a presentational aid effectively is actually using a poorly constructed aid. There are many common mistakes presenters make while constructing their presentational aid. One common mistake is heavy text slides. To avoid this mistake, use maps, charts, and graphs to reduce text and create more visually appealing slides. Another common mistake is not taking into consideration the font size. Make sure that the visual or audio-visual should be large enough so that those in the back of the room can see them. And one thing to always keep in mind is, keep your aid simple, conceptually and visually. Make the aid easier to understand, not harder, by conveying only one idea per aid and expressing it clearly in the title. The last hindrance we will talk about is when the presentational aid is contradictory to the words spoken. When using an aid, show the aid only when you are ready to discuss it, and remove it from view as soon as you have finished, just like I did at slide 3 in this mini presentation. Now that we know the benefits of using presentational aids and some of the hindrances we might encounter, let's talk about what types of presentational aids we can use. One type of presentational aid that we can use are graphs. Graphs are generally representations intended to make statistics and statistical trends and relationships clearer and more understandable because they allow numbers to be represented visually. Graphs are a great way to reduce text of statistical information and making the information more visually appealing. Another visual aid related to graphs are charts. Charts are used to clarify relationships between steps and positions. Charts like graphs can make more abstract number relationships understandable and easy to process. The most commonly used visual aids are images. Images are a great way to add variety to your aids. However, 2 things to keep in mind. 1, images must be used with a purpose. Don't put images to fill up screen space. Rather, use the images to supplement what you are saying. Number 2, make sure that images are large enough for everyone to see, especially people in the back. Maps is another type of visual aids that is used, depending on your topic. Maps can be a good way to show schematic representations of real or imaginary geographic areas by showing where 2 or more places are in relation to one another. For example, if your speech is about the different types of restaurants on campus, a map is a good visual aid to help illustrate where these restaurants are located. Diagrams is another good type of presentational aid. Diagrams are types of drawings used to show a whole in its parts. It is important to remember, though, to keep diagrams simple, because a poorly prepared diagram can lessen your credibility. The least commonly used type of visual aid is actual objects. Actual objects are the most concrete form of visual representation, but not always feasible to use. But to use actual objects in a presentation can be done in a couple of ways. 1, using a person from the audience is a good way to keep the listener's attention. Number 2, bringing in an inanimate object is also a great way for the listeners to see precisely the thing that you are talking about. The other types of presentational aids other than visual aids are these 3. Number 1, audio materials. Sometimes an explanation or description is incomplete without sound. Take this example. John wants to explain to his audience the 3 notes of sounds from a guitar. To do so, John must play these 3 types of sounds for his audience to make the concept more concrete and compelling. Without the audio or sound, John will not be able to effectively explain how each note sounds. Keep in mind, though, an audio aid should not take more than 5% of your allotted speaking time. Number 2 are audio-visual materials. Audio-visual materials enhance the verbal message through sight and sound, and are relatively easy to access through the internet. You can use short clips from films and videos to demonstrate concepts or processes or expose the audience to important people. Make sure, though, to choose clips that are short, and again, not more than 5% of your speaking time, and choose clips that really enhance your message. Lastly, there are other forms of presentational aids. Depending on the topic, other sensory aids that appeal to smell, touch, and taste can be used in a presentation. For example, if you are presenting about some cultural foods, bringing in samples of that type of food would be a great type of sensory aid that appeals to taste. Now that we know all the types of presentational aids that we can use, what are some guidelines that we need to keep in mind when constructing presentational aids? Number 1, shoot for at least 5 slides. A slide for the introduction, a slide for the conclusion, and slides for 3 main points. You want to remember to keep the presentational aid simple and convey only one idea per aid, and express it clearly in the title by using single words and short phrases. Number 2, aid should add to the message. Do not repeat what is on the visual aid and do not read off of your visual aid. The presentational aid is there to help your audience members understand and retain what you are saying, and is there for you to help remember in case you forget. Number 3, avoid too much text. Limit the amount of reading your audience needs to do. Use a variety of images, graphs, and diagrams to help you reduce the text on your visual aid. Number 4, use appropriate captions, titles, and citations. And this goes hand in hand with citing your sources, and that is citing the information and the images you have used. Number 5, make sure the presentational aid you are using is large, neat, professional, and clear. Use a consistent style that is easy to read and keep the information laid out in a way that is aesthetically pleasing. And lastly, number 6, be consistent with your colors and fonts. Use a single background color and make sure there is sufficient contrast between the background and the labels and images. Generally, use light colors like tan and white or pastel colors for backgrounds and bold colors such as black, blue, and purple for titles and labels because they can be easily seen from a distance. As for the font size, use a type size large enough to be seen clearly from anywhere in the room. A rule of thumb: for audiences of 40 or more, slide titles should be in 48 points type, and labels should be in 36 point type. Never use a font size smaller than 20 points, even in smaller audiences. Now that we know how to construct a presentational aid, the question remains is, how can we integrate them in our presentation? Number 1, you want to make sure to practice with your presentational aid. When you are done creating your presentational aid, be sure to practice your speech with your presentational aid. When practicing, make notes on your speaking outline to remind yourself where in the speech to present the aid. If possible, practice with overheads and transparencies to get used to placing them on and removing them off from the projector, as well as to point to items on the screen. Also, if you can, practice with the LCD projector you'll be using for your actual presentation, so that you are familiar with the setup and operation of that unit. All this reduces anxiety by assuring you of proficiency, and the aids will no longer be an unknown fear. Number 2, position your aids before beginning your speech. Before speaking, position all your presentational aids and equipment where you want them, and make sure everything is ready and in working order. Take the time to position your aids will make you feel more confident and look more professional. Number 3, reference your presentational aid during your speech. As we have discussed earlier in the presentation, when referencing your presentational aid, you must explain your aid and integrate them fully and appropriately in your speech. Doing so means helping your audience members understand why and how the aid supports and enhances your verbal message. Number 4, use conceal and reveal by adding blank slides. Show an aid only when you're about to discuss it and remove it from view as soon as you've finished, as I have done throughout this presentation. Otherwise, it may distract listeners from your speech. And lastly, number 5, talk to your audience and not your presentational aid. Make sure you're facing your audience and not your aid. Never give your back to your audience. Keep in mind to stand on the side of your aid and gesture with the hand closest to the aid. As we come to the end of this mini lesson, you are now ready to create and use your presentational aid effectively in your speech. To help you make sure you have created an effective presentational aid, here is a checklist you can follow. Ask yourself, 1, do you use appropriate and relevant images? that are meaningful to your presentation? 2. Do you use too much text that could be reduced by using an image or a graph? Number 3. Do you have a good balance of words and images? And do you try to avoid white space by cluttering the aid with text and images? Number 4. Do you use appropriate titles, headings, and keywords that can easily be seen? Number 5. Do your slides appear in the order in which you speak? And number 6. Do you have a title slide, a conclusion slide, to help your audience members follow along with you from beginning to end? Now that we are at the end of our mini lesson, let's go over the 2 most important points we learned today. Number 1, we learned the 6 things to consider when constructing an effective presentational aid. And number 2, we also learned how to effectively integrate presentational aids in our speech. I hope that you learned a lot from this mini lesson, and thank you for following with me today.